channel, and I'm Bruce Coleman, and this is part of the Introduction to Anthropology series on my channel, and this is the last of the Spice Island videos. So I had talked about the spice route, the spice trade, searching for the Spice Islands, the age of exploration, and then looking at the south and nutmeg and mace in the Banda Islands. And now we're going to switch up north and talk about that. So what's happening up north in Ternate and Tidore in the Amban, where the cloves are located. So while the European struggle was going on in the south, this struggle between the European powers, there was also a struggle going on up north for cloves, and is centered on the twin islands of Ternate and Tidore. And they're separated just by a little stretch of water. You can see, I'll see if I've got a video of, not a video, but a photo of when I was there a couple of years ago in Ternate. But you can see the islands from each other. And so this is where cloves are grown. So the Portuguese departed from Malacca. Remember, they had taken Malacca, and so they departed for Malacca, which had been captured under the command of Antonio de Abreu in 1512, and they set off for the Spice Islands, and they went past Bali, Java first, Bali, Lombok, Sumbawa. They got over to, they ran aground. Oh, one of their ships ran aground in Madura. Madura is just up here above Java. Here's a photo, show you. And so one of their ships ran aground there. They had to abandon it. They took everything. They started with 3 ships. They took everything, moved them onto 2 ships, and they so then they set off with these 2 ships, and they had passed the islands. They came up to a cape, and they named this cape the Cabo de Flores because of the red flamboyant flowers that were there. And the island got its name Flores, which of course it's still known as, and it's a beautiful island. And after reaching Banda, and I told about that last time, the two ships set off for home, and they also bought a local junk in Banda, and the captain of the local junk was Francisco Serrao, and it broke up in heavy seas. It didn't make it too far. Broke up in heavy seas. And Serrao and his crew, according to the legend, they kind of ambushed some local fishermen. They seized their vessels. They made them take them up to Amban, and just to the north. And from there, they had managed to keep all their uniforms and their weapons. And so they were quite a sight, and their reputation spread throughout the area. And the Sultan of Ternate heard about them, and so he invited them to his island, and they were welcomed with open arms when they arrived. The captain made himself at home. He was adopted by the Sultan. He married a princess. Now, this is unclear because I've seen a couple of different sources that have said slightly different things. One said Serrao brought a princess with him from Java, and another source says that he married a princess from Ternate. So, unclear, but he marries a princess, so he has a local wife, and he makes himself advisor to the Sultan. And he does pretty well. He's ordered home numerous times by Portuguese government, but he ignores this, and so he's one of these early travelers who seemed to be seduced by the beauty of Indonesia, and he was doing pretty well. He has a beautiful local wife. He's the advisor to the Sultan, and he's got power. But ultimately, he meets a sad fate and supposedly is poisoned by the Sultan. It's not clear exactly how he dies, but that's one story. So anyway, the Portuguese were allowed to build a trading post on the island and gain a monopoly of the cloves trade in return for building a fort for the Sultan and supplying him with arms, because Ternate and Tidore, these two twin islands, were constantly in a struggle, and this is local politics. And the Sultan thought, well, look, yeah, we've got some modern weapons, some trained guys. This can throw things into our favor, can change the balance of power here. And so he was quite happy to give the Portuguese a trading post and a monopoly on the clove trade, if this would mean that he could defeat his rival in Tidore. And by the way, 1 kilogram of cloves at that time, worth $1, was worth $10 on Malacca. You could sell it for $100 on Goa. You could sell it for $1,000 back in Lisbon. 1,000% profit. So this is what's going on here. Money, money, money. So the Portuguese are here, and they're ensconced in Ternate. But the Spanish show up, and they're on the island of Tidore. And they're welcomed by the Sultan there because, well, he needs something to offset the advantage that his rival, the Sultan of Ternate, has with the Portuguese. And so now you have the Portuguese on Ternate and the Spanish on Tidore. So now in 1522, you have the Portuguese and the Spanish on the neighboring islands, the twin islands, and there's battles that go on here, but nothing decisive. By 1522, this is going on, this battles back and forth, but eventually, by 1529, King Carlos of Spain realizes that because of the difficulties of crossing the Pacific and the financial burdens, that it would be it was going to be impractical commercially and militarily to enforce his claims to the Spice Islands. And so he ceded his claim to the Portuguese with the understanding that later on he may reclaim it if some new map making shows that the islands are actually on the Spanish side of the world. You remember that when I was talking about how the world was split into two last time. And so he gets a payment of 350,000 gold ducats. And the two countries signed the Treaty of Saragossa. The Spanish decided to use the Philippines as their base in the Pacific, and with a base in Acapulco, they had a trade route that went from the Philippines to Acapulco to the Caribbean and then back to Spain. And their treasure consisted of spices, gold and silver from Peru, Chinese silks, porcelain, lacquerware, and Spanish silver dollars that were minted in Peru were worth 8 reals, became known as pieces of 8, and they became the trade currency throughout the Orient and the Indies. So the Portuguese had the Spice Islands to themselves by this time, but they were far from home, and they stocked Fort Gamalama with some of the dregs of Portugal. Criminals, the unwanted, the unfit. It was not the best of situations. And in the meantime, outside of the fort, the locals, there are all sorts of political machinations going on. Rights of secession, who's in charge, how they're relating to Tidore. Corruption was everywhere. Remember, the Portuguese now have a monopoly on trade, and it's supposed to be for the crown. But in fact, everybody has their own little business. They're all selling individually. And so when people would come, be sent from Portugal to Ternate, they would bring these chests of trade items because they were going to do their own little individual business. So corruption is everywhere. Everybody's engaged in private trade. There's a line of governors that are sent in and then brought home for corruption and misuse of authorities. And in the meantime, the Portuguese are also getting themselves involved in the rivalry between Ternate and Tidore, as well as local politics, even though their purpose at the beginning was just to make money, and they were specifically not going to get involved in local affairs. So here they are, and they've got their fort. People are not as friendly because, well, initially they were, but like a lot of places, you don't really want these foreigners here. What are they doing? And they're definitely not of high moral caliber. And so there's an unfriendly situation outside the fort. In 1546, Francis Xavier of the Society of Jesus, founded by Ignatius Loyola, he shows up in Ternate and he wants to convert the Muslims to Christianity. Well, he develops a good relationship with the Sultan. The Sultan liked him. They would sit and have conversations about religion and other things. But the local people were not too happy about the persistence of Christians, the Christian attempts to convert Muslims. And so this is just one more thing that creates this unfavorable situation for the Portuguese. So there's continuous rebellions of locals going on against the Portuguese. There's these issues between Ternate and Tidore, internal politics, and resentments from the locals about the Portuguese getting involved in the internal politics, and so there's all these hostilities. In addition, there are all these criminals that's living there, creating havoc, getting drunk, trying to entice the local ladies, and fears of mutiny. So by December 31st, 1547, the Portuguese surrendered after the latest rebellion, and they decided to leave the island. With the Portuguese gone, the Sultanate of Ternate resumed trading with its old partners, the Javanese, the Arabs, the Gujaratis, the Achinese. Christians were pushed out of the area, which made the local people happy. And Ternate became one of the most prosperous trading centers in the Indonesian Isles, of course not called the Indonesian Isles at that time. And the golden age of the Ternatean Sultanate began, which is to last about 30 years. So, we've got the Portuguese. They're out. They've moved back to Malacca. They're still doing the trade, but there's no longer a necessity, they feel, to stay in a place where they're not wanted, which is dangerous. They can do the trading from Malacca. 1579, Sir Francis Drake shows up on his way from California with the Golden Hind, and the Sultan of Ternate sees another opportunity here, and so he proposes an alliance with the English against some Portuguese who have returned after they left in 1575 and are on Tidore, rebuilding a fort there. And so Drake agrees, but we're not going to do it right now. we'll come back, we'll let the Queen know, and then we can come back and assist you in the future. Well, the English do come back, and I'll get to that in a minute. So by 1581, King Philip of Spain takes over Portugal. And so Portugal and Spain are united. And he sends a force to Ternate to recapture it. And by 1585, the Spanish have arrived in Tidore to join with the Portuguese that are already there. And they launch an attack on Fort Gamalama. And they were defeated, and they left. The locals put up a good fight, and the Spanish, Portuguese left for Manila. Now, by 1596, the Dutch decide that they want in on the action. And they've arrived in Java, they made a mess there, and they fled. Their first expedition was a failure. They try again in 1598. And were successful, returning with a profit of approximately 400%. In 1601, they arrive in Ternate, where the Sultan tries to convince them to attack the Portuguese on Tidore. They refuse, but they fired a few cannon volleys over at the fort, but they were not really interested in getting into a war at this point. The English are back by 1601. And they make a few trades, and they think, okay, maybe we're ready to challenge the Spanish Portuguese. Now, in 1602, the VOC, the Dutch East India Company, is formed, and in 1605, the Dutch of the VOC arrive with 12 armed warships, 1,500 men to attack the Portuguese. They arrive in Ambon, and they defeated the Portuguese there. This was the beginning of the end for the Portuguese in the Spice Islands. So you've got the Dutch, the Portuguese, Spanish, and the English. They're all at Ternate and Tidore. The Dutch wanted the Sultan of Ternate to join in an attack on Tidore. At this point, the Dutch have changed their mind. They say, look, you wanted us to fight first, so now we're ready to fight. So let's go. But at this point, he decides to ally himself with the English, who are back, and he warmly tells stories with the new English captain about Sir Francis Drake. And so he decides he's going to sit this out. But in order not to be attacked by the Dutch, he tells the English that he can't officially side with them, he can't officially trade with them, but he will trade with them under the table. Then he tells the Sultan of Tidore, look, if you stay out of this, I'll stay out of this. Let's just let the Europeans fight among themselves, kill each other off, and we're going to be better in the long run. So he was hoping that the two European powers, the Dutch, the Spanish, Portuguese, would kill each other off. The English at this point decide to remain neutral. So the Dutch attack, and they were about to lose the battle when to a Portuguese counterattack, when the Portuguese fort caught fire and blew up. The munitions caught fire and blew up, and the Dutch won. However, they leave, go back home, and they leave a small group behind to defend Tidore. That was the mistake. The Spanish return from Manila in 1606, and they take Tidore, and they make an alliance against Ternate and the Dutch with the Sultan of Tidore. So they end up taking Ternate, and the 30-year golden age of Tidore, Ternate is over. However, the Dutch return. They set up a base on the other side of Ternate. And so you've got the Spanish on one side, the Dutch on the other side of the same island. And so their last battle is a draw. Now they're both trading from their sides of the island, and they're doing intermittent fighting. So they signed a truce in 1609. So by 1663, the Spanish give up their interest in the Spice Islands, and they move everything to Manila. The Dutch end up with a informal alliance with the Sultan of Ternate, who thought that the Dutch would restrict their activities just to trading, and not interfere with local affairs. So, okay, he was cool with that. Wrong. Jan Pieterszoon Cohen, who I talked about before, is here, and you know what he does in Banda. So, the Dutch controlled Banda by this time. They wanted to solidify their control over the whole of the Spice Islands. So they transported cloves from the islands of north, Maluku to Ambon, which they have much better control over. And villagers there were forced to plant and maintain at least 100 trees per family. Uprooting or destroying of trees was punishable by death. So the Dutch are not messing around here. The British ended their presence by 1623 after the Dutch massacred 17 English traders living in Ambon, the photo. And in 1667, there was the Treaty of Breda, where the English got Manhattan for the island of Run, which I talked about, the island of Run down in the Banda area. And the Dutch were producing so much that they would burn large quantities of cloves in order to keep the price down. So they controlled everything, but there was still secret trading going on through Makassar over in the what was called the Celebes then, Sulawesi now, from planters in Ternate and Tidore and Halmahera and Serrao. And so the Dutch need to put an end to this to solidify their control. So they attacked Makassar in 1660, but they're unable to defeat the Sultan. By 1667, they had made an alliance with another local kingdom who had some Portuguese mercenaries, and they defeated Makassar. And they now controlled everything. And of course, with the defeat in Makassar, you're going to see movements of the Portuguese as the Dutch have control of Sulawesi now, Makassar area. You see the Portuguese start to move out and look for other opportunities around Indonesia, and of course here in Kampung Bugis is one of those places. So the Dutch control everything now. They have the spice trade locked up. They've got these islands nominally under control. The VOC was the richest company in the world at the time. It had 150 merchant ships, 40 warships, 30,000 employees, 15,000 soldiers. But this monopoly was eventually broken. Now here there's a couple of stories on this too. So the one story I mentioned last time, I might have mentioned both of them last time. One story I mentioned last time was that the British, when they left, they took cloves and nutmeg with them and transplanted them in their colonies in other parts of the world. But there's another story, and books down here, you should read it. It's fascinating. So a Frenchman named Peter Povey managed to smuggle out nutmeg and clove seedlings and spread them around the world. Okay, so there's two stories here about the breaking of the monopoly. Either way, it's done. It's broken. And at this point, cloves and nutmeg are passé. They're still used. They still generate a profit, but they're not the hot items at this point. And so by the end of the spice monopoly, the islands were still important for China trade. The eastern passage between Batanta and Sulawesi, this is over in the Papua area, allowed the British to sail directly from the Cape of Good Hope to China. And then in 1795, because of the French Revolution, the King of Holland fled to London, and he gave up all of the Dutch territories overseas to the British in return for hiding out there. By 1801, the British were back in the Spice Islands, and they took Tidore. They were in control of all the Spice Islands until 1802, with the Treaty of Amiens. The Dutch were back in control then. In 1807, Napoleon makes William Dindels the Governor General of the East Indies. He arrives in Batavia, proclaims the Dutch East Indies as part of the French Empire. The British invade Java in 1811 and took control, and Raffles, the legendary Raffles, and there's a good book on Raffles. If I can find the link, I'll put it here. My guy who has written a number of books about Indonesia, really good books. And he's written about Raffles, and that Raffles is not quite the as wonderful as everybody thinks he is, as a legend here in Indonesia. So Raffles is the Governor General, and by 1816, with the defeat of Napoleon, the Dutch regained their territory in the Peace of Paris, and they remained in control of Indonesia until the Japanese invade during World War II, and the Dutch come back at the end of World War II. They want to reclaim their former colony, but the Indonesians have other ideas, and the revolution is underway. And maybe I'll make a video about that. I have to make a video about that. The revolution is great. Okay, and so that's the Spice Islands. Great place to visit. I really want to get there once this coronavirus thing is we either learn to live with it and it gets down to manageable numbers. I really want to go back there and take my grandkids with me. There's some cool swimming and a lot of interesting things to see out there. And so that's it. I hope you've learned a little bit something about the history of Indonesia, the Spice Islands, the Spice Route, and the Malukus. And next time in Indonesia, in the anthropology series, I'm going to finish up the history of anthropology and talk about anthropology as it develops in the United States. And so that's it. Thanks for viewing. If you're in Indonesia, remember you have to wear a mask. If you're in Bali, they're fining people and foreigners that are not paying the fine, because some reports came out today in the news. They've just started fining people, foreigners not paying. They said, look, I'm not going to pay. Indonesian police are taking names and reporting them to immigration, where they could be detained and deported. So it's mask wearing time for everybody. Okay, so stay safe. Thanks for viewing, and see you next time.